On this episode of the Training Simplified podcast, I had the privilege of sitting down with Chris Rodriguez. Chris is the senior manager of training at TopGolf and walks us through their release of manager training programs over the past 6+ months. In the past 6+ months, they've released 4 separate programs and they're continuing to build out and release more. And Chris talks through the logistical challenge of building multiple programs at one time, but also the benefits that come along with building those programs, something I can attest to. We did the same at Chipotle back in the day. Chris walks through how they're doing it now at TopGolf, releasing 4 programs in 6 months across the enterprise, which is a pretty fascinating story. He talks about the benefit of pilot programs, both to get feedback to make the programs better, but also to build buy-in along the way from the folks out in the units that he's supporting. He talked through a few innovations that they're putting into it, like leveraging QR codes within the books or the content that ends up out at TopGolf locations so that they can keep content up to date through the QR codes, and also talk through some really interesting things on leveraging the technologies that he already has. TopGolf uses the Microsoft suite that comes with a lot of technologies, and Chris found a way to leverage automations and free tech that they're already paying for in their enterprise platform to automate some of the processes within his training ecosystem to make his process more efficient, which I found fascinating. And then finally, the last thing that we wrap up on, and I love it because it's near and dear to my heart, Chris talked through his use of frameworks from Disney's Imagineering, the way that the Imagineers at Disney leverage feedback and showing your work to make your products better. It's something I believe in. It's something I've used in my career as well, and talks through just a different perspective of how to leverage people that make really good content over at Disney and some of the skills and tactics they use to make your training content better. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Chris. It's a fascinating journey in his career and some really cool stuff that they're building at TopGolf. With that, let's jump into it. Chris, let's just get it started. Tell us a little bit about your background, the role that you're in, and how you ended up in the role that you're in.
Sure. So I'm the senior manager of training at TopGolf in our Dallas office. And so my primary role is building out our leadership programs for the field, whether it be in the front of house or heart of house. But really to get started, where it all started is actually Jack in the Box. I always tell this story is my first job as a 16-year-old was in the kitchen frying. Honestly, I was there because I loved the tacos. And I was like, hey, if I work at Jack in the Box, I get free tacos. So let's do it. And, before I knew it, I was moving up to team lead, to assistant manager, general manager, and just loved being in the fast food hospitality field. So I stuck with that. I got to open up a new Jack in the Box in the Fort Worth area. But also, too, I was trying to manage school at the same time. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew that I thought I needed a degree to be successful. But also, too, I was like, I am very successful in what I do here. So how do I take what I'm learning here, but also continue down that path of success? And obviously, too, with fast food, I'm sure it's 24/7. It's a lot of hours. And so I tell everyone I had everything but a life, because I was always in the restaurant and I was always making sure that everyone was set up for success. But then I also would not leave. And I was like, I have to get out of this restaurant sometimes and leave the tacos behind. But started kind of looking around. I was with Jack in the Box for about 6 years. And then I started looking around at different food types. And then Zoe's Kitchen, now Cava, but Zoe's Kitchen was new and was coming and opening up very rapidly in the area. And so they had a new restaurant in Fort Worth. And I was like, I'm just going to apply and see what happens there. Ended up getting the job as assistant general manager and made that switch. But also, too, if you're familiar with Cava or Zoe's, there's a lot of catering that goes on to that. So those hours came back. There was not getting away from the hours of opening and closing and then making sure catering orders were ready for the next day. So that's when I knew that I loved hospitality. I loved training, but I just thought training was just, creating some paper job aids and calling it a day for your employees and then moving on to the next one. And so I started, meeting new peers and new managers and really understanding that there's a world of learning and development or training out there. And so there's a lot more to learn with that. However, how do I get into that field, but also continue in the hospitality or in the food industry or hospitality of some sort? And so jokingly, my mom and my whole family's in the logistics world. And so they actually needed someone, they were transferring to a new system. And so I had the experience of training because I opened two Zoe's Kitchens in the Fort Worth area, but I had the experience of opening those restaurants. And so like, hey mom, get me a job kind of thing. Well, as the universe would have it, they were like, my mom was like, hey, come apply because they need someone to learn the system. You're great at training systems in restaurants. So just, hear them out. I went and went through the interview and ended up getting the job. And so I was like, oh, well, it was great, but also too, it was still part of training, but I also got into the corporate world, and being able to apply some of the things that I had in the restaurant hospitality industry. But with that catch, there was moving to relocate. The corporate office at the time was BNSF Logistics. Their headquarters was in Northwest Arkansas. And I'm from Dallas. I'm a city boy, but I took the move to learn about, just to get the experience that I needed. And whenever I did that, it opened up that whole world of learning and development training. They were putting those teams together. And that's when I really got my feet wet into, there's job aids, there's instructor-led classes, there's, e-learning. I had no idea all of these things had terms. I just thought it was, here's training.
Yeah.
And so, I had a great peer there, my boss at the time, and he really taught me, look at these things. And they were starting to build programs, but I was literally just a facilitator and facilitating these systems classes. But once I got so immersed in those systems, I was like, okay, now I can actually hey, there's these changes here. And then they were like, well, if you need to make the change, here's the document or here's the course, go for it. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing. And so I just learned from there and started really picking up the little pieces here and there. But with all that being said, there was still this piece of me that just was looking for that hospitality piece, serving the public and really meeting new people, because in logistics, it's freight industry. It's moving something from point A to point B, and there's sales and operations. There's really not a lot of customer interaction through that. There's a little bit, but not like as you would, in a restaurant or a hotel or something to that nature. So I still had my heart set, and I've got to get my foot back into some type of hospitality industry. And so Main Event Entertainment at the time had a LinkedIn position, and I just did the little easy apply. And before I knew it, I was getting the job. And so I was in logistics for about 6 years. So I really got a lot of experience in that time. But once I got into the Main Event side and moved over there, that's where they had me really focused in on just e-learning and building content itself. And so, I had that experience. At the time, Main Event was going through some structural changes, things like that. So I had to take on additional work. And one of the additional pieces was building out a shift lead, a manager program, really the big programs. And I was like, I know nothing about programs, but hey, let's try it. I've been throwing all these different things and I've figured it out along the way. I can figure this out too. And, I had my peers around me, I had great mentors, everyone to really bounce the ideas off of. And so from there, I started building out those programs, and, I built some with Main Event, and then had the opportunity to make the switch over with TopGolf and continue taking the learnings that I had with Main Event and just applying them with TopGolf. So it's been a crazy ride, but every single step that I've done and every place that I've moved has been strategic in my book in order to get me to where I am right now.
What a cool journey to start in restaurants because you love it, because you love the food, but then get this whole different experience with logistics to then come back into restaurants. Do you feel like, aside from the L&D stuff and learning the ropes of L&D and logistics, did anything you learned in the logistics world apply back into restaurants? Once you came back into hospitality, was it oh, I learned a whole lot about actually logistics, manufacturing, operations that now give me a whole new lens in the restaurant world?
It did, absolutely. There was a lot of, in the logistics world, it's a different audience, you could say. And so, when you're training those type of audiences, that was the biggest, I think, takeaway from logistics, even into that is, hospitality has a different audience to where it's a lot of new people that are, if you're in a fast food, right? You have 16-year-olds, this is their first job. And so when you have trainings and learnings like that, you want something that's engaging, because we're constantly on our phones. If you're not in it in 60 seconds or less, they're not going to pay attention. And so even that too with adult learning as well. So taking those learnings, okay, we have this audience here and this audience here, what works in between, and also has a mesh. You may have somebody in the hospitality world that's been there for 50 plus years. And so how do you keep them engaged just as you do a new person that this is their first job?
Yeah, it's like the ultimate challenge is the differences in first job from lifers and trying to introduce them all to the same training at the same time. Very cool. So you're at TopGolf now. What are your priorities today? What is your focus in the short term, like next 12 months? What's on your plate and what are your biggest priorities?
As we all say, MIT, MIT, MIT. It's a little mixture of both. We originally set out when I first got hired, my primary role was to launch MIT program. There was an existing program that lived out there when I started. 2018 was the program, so it was outdated. It worked, but it had many, many band-aids. You think of like a sinking boat, and you put a band-aid here and band-aid there. Eventually, it's just gonna all fall apart. So there was a lot of band-aids on the program, but essentially it did the job. Like, hey, there's some pieces you got to pick out, but it worked. So my primary focus was to get MIT out. And with that, obviously, just being with the company, knowing my skill set, multiple things started coming at me. And so I love to multitask. One thing with building programs is it's not just one project you're waiting on these pieces. There's so many moving parts to it that you're waiting on this subject matter expert to give you something on this launch, or you're waiting on a subject matter expert to give you on this. So keeping those coming at you, you're able to divide your work and say, okay, I want to focus on this right now. And with all that being said, I was able to take on additional. So the heart of house came to us and was like, hey, we got wind that he's making front of house training. We're up. We need some. When can we get some of the pot? And it was at first it was like, well, we got to focus on front of house. I said, no, let's do both. I love to multitask. I can manage both. There's probably some learnings from the front that we can put in the back, and there's some in the back that we can put in the front. So it worked out well. But with those programs, my priority was getting those out. We have multi levels of management within our venues. And so we just now rolled out that first, I call it the core piece of the program. So hey, you're a manager with TopGolf, you need to know A, B, C, D. No matter what, if you're the top manager or you're the entry level manager, you need to know these things. And that's what the program that we launched is doing today, is getting that skill set to successfully run the venue. And now we're moving into role specific training to where it's like, okay, you're in this role, you need to know this plus this. And so building out all of those different layers, as you can think of, is the next piece of our pipeline.
That's great. You mentioned some of the challenges of trying to get through, like trying to, one, keep it all balanced. But two, you've got multiple departments coming at you, trying to roll it all out at the same time. At TopGolf, what are some of the unique challenges you're all facing in delivering this and putting this out there, or in getting it out there? It sounds like you had one program already. Now you've got 2 to 4 or 5 that you're about to roll out. Walk me through that. Like what are you up against? What are some of the challenges that you've got to navigate in order to pull that off?
Sure. So we launched the front of house first. So it'd be our manager in training and team lead program. And so we launched those on Memorial Day. And when rolling those out, the biggest piece was there was so many different components of it that were new to the field. It wasn't the typical old school binders as you probably think of a program. We moved all digital. It's all QR code based, so we can update the content behind the scenes, but yet your workbook does not change. And so that was a huge win when it came to these. And so the biggest piece was getting everyone to adapt to those QR codes, because if you're not used to QR codes, it's like, oh, scan it. Well, what happens when you scan it? And laying on top of that, new systems and new pieces that we've added into the complexity. So the biggest challenge was getting the adoption of everyone to understand the new workflow. We have this ongoing joke is that we built this really fancy car. Now we just got to teach everyone how to drive it. And if you don't know how to drive it, you're not going to use it. And so we have this really nice car, and people are starting to pick it up and learn and adapt. Everyone was super excited when the program's launched ultimately, because like, oh, we need it. But now that they're in there, they're like, oh, maybe I didn't need this feature, or maybe, it's like a car. It's like, I've never used this button right here. I don't know what it does, but you need to in order to successfully drive the car. So with that too, now that we've launched it and we were like, okay, we need to put in the chef and training program and the kitchen manager and give some love to the heart of house. That's 2 additional programs that we've now put out there. So with that, we took the learnings. We had 90 days essentially because we launched that on Labor Day. So we had about 3 months to learn from the first launch into the second one. So we were able to apply the learnings that we've had just in those 3, but then also 2, we're very key on pilots. And so we had all of those learnings too. So when we rolled it, it was a pretty smooth roll as far as like everyone knew. It wasn't like hey, this is here today, by the way. Like everyone was like, oh, we're ready.
That's great. That's great. I feel like everybody approaches pilots differently. How did you pick your pilots? Who were they? What exactly did they test? And how much time did you allocate to piloting before the Labor Day and Memorial Day launches?
Yeah. So with the first front of house section, we once I was ready to pilot, which was earlier last year, we said, okay, ideally we wanted to pick, have certain metrics to select for a venue to pilot the program. However, even though you're a game player, that you may not have a manager that you need. So therefore we couldn't put it in your venue to pilot. We need someone that truly is hiring a manager. So partnering with our talent team and saying, hey, show me the venues that have or new managers that are getting hired in. And then being able to say, okay, here's the list. Let's see, where these fall and which ones A2, because, in hospitality, there's seasonal business, there's other pilots going on, not just my programs. I've got to take in consideration, are we rolling out a new limited time offer? Are we testing something in that venue? So looking at all the other pilots that are going on, plus the location, plus the leadership team that's there really played a key component before we just said, okay, let's test it out. Once we selected our actual venues to test something out, then I would reach out, have that one-on-one call and just walk them through what my expectations are and really saying, hey, break the program. Like, we want you to nitpick this and find everything that's wrong with it in order for us to make it better. Because what you're doing for us is really molding this for the future to come. Because if you don't say anything, we're not going to know, and we're not going to fix it. So having them, every single venue that I asked to pilot, their excitement of being chosen, like, oh, you want us to test this out? We've needed it, but yet we get it first, has really helped. And then 2, even just with the buy-in itself, because they got to be the pilot. And so when we did rollouts, it was like, hey, tell us about your experience when you went, you piloted this. And, they shared, or this didn't work. And then luckily, most of the things that didn't work, I was able to say, we fixed that. So it was great to have those conversations and that buy-in from that original core group.
That's great, because I feel like getting that buy-in almost helps with the rest of the venues in your case. So the other managers of saying, hey, this wasn't just like a corporate thing that got released, but it's been through the ringer. Managers test, people that were in your shoes tested this thing. They've now approved it, and we've made changes based on their feedback. Did you use their testimonials at all in the rollout to bring that, or was that your experience as well?
We did, as far as, in the beginning, or whenever we had our rollout calls is what we call them, having them share what their experience was. And then 2, just even to this day, we receive emails and, hey, thank you for this, or thank you for that. And just saying, hey, when you have those conversations in your manager meetings, please be sure to express, how this worked for you, or what you're doing in order for you to successfully do that. Because we've learned in these pilots is that not every venue is exactly the same. We've got lower volume, we've got higher volume, we have some that are a different format. And so there's certain things that we couldn't necessarily put in the program and say, do it this way, because you may operate a little differently. So being able to tailor the program, it was a huge win to them. And that's one of the things that we kept in mind when building this is, hey, there's some flexibility. We're not going to say that you can't move. We don't want you putting, HR functions on day one. That's not a good onboarding experience, but we do have the flexibility that maybe that won't fall on that shift. So you can kind of move it around. Events is a really good one, because you need to learn about events in a venue. You may not have an event this week. So therefore you've got to move that shift to next week in order to get that full experience.
That's interesting. I feel like that's the nuance that every brand faces are those things, like events in your case. Like, you all have to train what an event looks like, how it goes, and then timing that into a program to give it the flexibility to work for you. it can't be cut and dry. It can't be off the shelf to
Right.
that extent. Got to be custom to you all.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that you built, this is now 5 programs this year, which means it sounds like you're pumping out a lot of programs very quickly, which is amazing because I've talked to some folks that it takes years to build a program. What do you think your secret is? Like, how are you able to build multiple programs at the same time so quickly?
I think a big one that I take pride in is organization. You have to stay organized when building these out. Your own organization, whatever that, if that's a tracker, that's what I use. I created my own tool, day one. I look at it when I think about the first day I started and the Excel document I drafted of somewhat of a tracker. Now I look at it today, there's, 8 pages, 20 columns per page, but it keeps us organized and it keeps the ball rolling, because what I've learned is if you let something stop, the momentum stops, and therefore somebody else is not going to think it's as important to get that going. So if I'm waiting on, content on a certain section or whatever it may be, and they're like, hey, I'm going to give it to you this day, having that tracker and keeping up where the progress is and when the due date is really what keeps the ball rolling. And if, honestly, sometimes too, things, you may be so focused on another component of the program to where you necessarily don't need that right away. And they come back and say, hey, it's not going to be till next week. That's totally cool. That's fine. But keeping those conversations going with all those subject matter experts or leadership team in order to, so it's not one of those things like, oh yeah, whatever happened to that? Because as soon as that happens, then the buy-in really fails. But keeping that organization is key. And then don't get lost in the weeds. I remind myself that all the time, even just from an instructional design component, you look at, I'll use the logo for a perfect example. We wanted these to be branded. There's 4 programs that we knew. We wanted them to have a theme. So we call them leadership programs. So if there's 4 of them, we want them to look somewhat similar, but obviously different content. And so really tailoring and honing in on what does that design look like? What makes these look professional, but also fun, because we're TopGolf. And so in my brain, I could spend 6 hours creating a logo or a design, and then I've wasted this whole day on something. I mean, that's important, but also too, there's other pieces that you got to keep moving. And so if it's like, oh, this doesn't look good right now, I'm going to put it down and move on to this. And then this idea struck me to come back to this in order to move forward. So not getting lost in the sauce, I guess you could say.
Yes.
And just move forward. You can always change things, especially if you know that you're going to pilot. That's the key. If you're going to pilot, it's not permanent. The beauty, again, with these QR codes, and we have taken so much pride in, is that we can change these on the back end. With a dynamic QR code, anything can be changed. It's not printed. It's not sitting on a shelf to where it's like these books become out of date 6 months later.
I mean, and it sounds like you've also got this, like, you're doing multiples at a time. You realize that if it was just one project going, there would be delays. There would be periods of time where you could spend 12 hours on a logo because there's lulls, but you've also been able to balance running multiple programs, which has allowed you to make progress. Even if you don't need a program to be rolled out until Labor Day, I can start working on it months before that just to keep the ball rolling in these gaps while I'm waiting on things on other projects I'm working on. How do you balance that? Because I feel like that gets really complex, but you've been able to do that really well, which then you keep rolling things out. It's almost like you've created a rhythm now, it sounds like.
It is, with all these programs, example, with the team lead at MIT, there's lots of components because the MIT program was more of a refresh. It wasn't a new program. We had one out there, but we built this nice car for MIT. We want a new model for team leads. So we're going to build a model that supports, same company brand car, but then different versions of the model. But so updating the team lead program to match MIT, but also to seamlessly, if you get promoted, we don't want you to be in this MIT program that you took a couple years ago, or you don't want to be in the team lead program that you took a couple years ago, move into MIT, and you're like, wait a minute, this is speaking another language. So being able to have that refresh with that program really helped bridge the gap between, and also give everyone an opportunity for development within there, and they're all matching. But with that being said, it was able, when building out, okay, MIT, keeping in mind, hey, this may fit with team lead too. Where does this fit best? Or if this fits with team lead, is there components that we can apply into MIT, or same thing with the heart of house for culinary. There's components that a kitchen manager needs to know, but how can we apply that? So thinking bigger picture was enabled me to move the needle forward and continue to build to where essentially you're getting two programs in one.
That's great. I mean, that's really interesting. So it's not only that you're able to do multiple programs at a time, but by doing multiples at a time, it sounds like you're making each one better. Like you're learning things over here that you can apply over there that you wouldn't get if you're just doing one program start to finish and then starting another program. It's almost like building on themselves and making them better as you go as well.
Yeah.
That's great. That is great. How, I wonder if you can take me back to the beginning. I know you were hired to do this. So you were brought in to build manager programs, but to get that initial buy-in to, hey, we have a program that exists. There are Band-Aids all over it. What did buy-in look like to say, we're going to change it? It's time. The time is now. How do you get the buy-in to start doing what you've done, which is now transform management training? It starts somewhere. And I feel like for a lot of folks, getting that initial buy-in is the hardest part. Getting the organization to say yes is the domino that needs to fall first. What did that look like at TopGolf before you started this journey?
So as you mentioned, yes, I was hired for this role. So it was a little easier. I think it wasn't like, we're like, hey, we need this program. But what I can say is that there was components I don't think they didn't know that, I had to get that buy-in for, right? Like as far as moving to a QR code system, not, having the binders and all the printed job aids and, in systems, and what does that look like? And how do we, if we want to use this system or that system? So really focusing in on, I love to build rapport. That's just how I work. And, building that relationship and trust between leadership team and subject matter experts, because, everyone's going to have, especially with programs, I feel like everyone's going to have their opinion on what they think the program should consist of and how it should flow. And so, hearing them out and listening to why they think it should be this way, and then taking that, but then also taking all of these thoughts and putting them on paper or whiteboarding, as my boss and I do. But whiteboarding all of these out and saying, okay, I think we can use this, but maybe tailor it a little bit, really got the buy-in. So when I went back to the next meeting or next session of collaboration, it gave them a sense of being part of the program, saying, hey, I took what you said, I loved what you said, but this is what we've done in order to incorporate that. And it gave them, like, they had a voice whenever it came to actually rolling out.
It's so smart. I feel like that's so important that people feel like it's theirs, that it's not happening to them, but it's happening with them. Sounds like you spent a lot of time building that. Even we knew it was going to happen, but as I do this, let me get your opinion along the way so that by the time I deliver it, it's yours. You're not having to sell them after the fact or having built it already.
Yeah.
So how is it going now? So you're released. I know some of these just got released like a couple days ago, it sounds like. You've got some that have been live since Memorial Day, and you're trying to teach a company now how to drive this fancy new car. How is it going?
It's going. We've like I said, it's been a little over 90 days for MIT and team lead. And so, we've seen the completion rates have went up. I actually just ran them yesterday, and they've went up from the first 6 weeks of the program being out. So that's a plus. Lots of questions, lots of follow-up that we're getting. And that's, I think, key when you roll these out is, so when I built these programs with my past company, Main Event, when I made the switch, I just so happened to have built MIT, and they call it shift lead there, but I made the switch right at rollout. So it was like, hey, here's your nice package, but yet I'm not going to be here to see it. And, it killed me, but obviously, I had to do what was best for an opportunity for me. But with that being rolled out, once I got to TopGolf and I was able to rebuild and do different things, this is the first time I've actually seen a full rollout with these. So now I'm like, whoa, if I didn't know these questions were going to come up, and I didn't know what to expect when it came to rollout adoption. And so being able to address that, I think, was key. Even though they're rolled out, you're not done really. We thought making updates would be like maybe in 6 months or so, but we've kind of realized it's a monthly thing. And, it may not be a huge adjustment. It may be just simply a new course, or, things. But now that we've got, hundreds of people in the field using these programs, they're finding new ways to, work around or break things, which that's what we need to know what doesn't work, because our goal is to make sure that this doesn't become a 2018 product that's been sitting on the shelf, and we need someone to come update all of this. So keeping it up to date and fresh is what keeps everyone engaged. So, we see a lot of just questions, just asking the why. But once we show them, hey, this is, hey, let's hop on a call real quick. Let me show you how it's supposed to work. And then it's I didn't know, it's the easy button, right? That was easy. And so it really helps them understand. And so making myself available, I think, has been key to the success of rolling these out, not just here's the product, good luck.
And it becomes a big challenge then, right? Like I'm also sure you're trying to build other programs while now having to edit the 4 that are already live and keep them fresh while building the next new thing. It's like layers of complexity now to manage and make that happen.
Yep. You were right with Chef and KM Kitchen Manager. We just rolled those out 2 weeks ago. So, we haven't seen much traction yet as far as, who's started the program, because it's, again, based off hires. But the beauty with that too, and I felt like was really successful, was we had a lot of learning just in those 90 days, not even from pilot, just from those 90 days of, hey, this is how we've seen the program launch in front of house. So taking those learnings and applying it to heart of house really set those two up for success as well.
It's great. It's a repeated theme. It sounds like it just keeps making everything better. The more you do it, the more you learn, the faster you learn, the faster you can implement it and make everything better along the way. How will you ultimately measure success? So as these are live now, it sounds like completion right now is like, let's get them using the tools. What does success look like for a manager in training ecosystem that you're trying to build?
Sure. I think, the first one is once they complete the program, they go through they do a survey just to say, hey, did the program meet your expectations? What were your learnings? Too. But one piece that we really built into this program is what we call recaps. And so at the end of every shift, a trainee and a trainer have to give a recap into the program. And so we're capturing that data live, where it's not like, oh, what did I learn 6 weeks ago? Does that apply? How do I get feedback on that? So we're able to see that live feedback within 24 hours. And if there's something that we need to call out or address, we can do so immediately. So that's been a huge piece as far as, success or things that are not necessarily going as we thought they would. But two, once they go through the program, looking at long-term, are they successful in their role? Are they able to apply everything that they've learned from over the last 6 to 8 weeks, depending how long the program is, into their role, into their job functions, and move forward? From building the bench, as we call it, these managers that are next level move into a director of operations, the one that runs the venues, are they moving up within the levels of leadership? And then, okay, if they are, did they go through this program? Are we seeing a higher, transition from those that went through MIT or team lead that are getting promoted? And then also too, as I mentioned, retention, how are our employees staying based off the job path that we're giving them?
That's great. And so it sounds like, for those unfamiliar with TopGolf, and I'm learning on this call with you right now, but it sounds like these stack. So it's like you'll start here, then there's another program for you at the next level and another program at the next level.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being that you can progress through these over time, ultimately to become your director of operations.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you were to be an external hire and become a director of operations, you're getting all of those stacks that we have versus just that one piece. So yeah, it just continues to layer on, and it really helps with roles and responsibilities, right? Because you have many managers and you want to delegate tasks out and say, hey, let me just cross train you on this, but yet I want you to do this, when it's really not their role and responsibility. So it really, building those milestones or those modules of each role have set out the expectations of what your job function is.
It's great. That is fantastic. You mentioned the QR codes, which I think is interesting. Is there another part of these programs that you've built in that you're really proud of, that like, this is a super cool thing that I think is really unique about these, that maybe you experimented with, or you had a bunch of opinions, but you ended up here and you're like, that's really cool, or I'm really proud of that?
Yeah, I think, as you mentioned, the QR codes, but the next piece is the recap emails. those, just the daily recap, because it's essentially a digital checklist is what we've created with a recap at the end. And so that gives that live feedback, because those recaps get sent to their managers. And so it gives them that live instant feedback, because if I'm a new manager in training, I may not see my direct manager tomorrow or the next 2 days, because I could be training somewhere else in the venue. And so with those recaps, if I'm not seeing you, then therefore I'm still knowing what's going on. And if there's something as a manager, as a leader, I need to address about my new MIT in training, then I'm able to do that based off those recaps. So we had a lot of discussion. I would say that was probably the biggest piece, and a lot we learned, because we wanted to leverage the systems and technology that we have within our brand instead of going out and buying another supplement or another form or tool that we need to buy and subscribe to. So leveraging that was challenging, but we made it work. I'm a Power Automate genius now, I could say. Maybe, I don't know if a genius, but I've learned a lot about Power Automate. Let's just say that.
And what is Power Automate? I've never heard it before.
So it's a Microsoft tool that's used with Microsoft products, like Microsoft Forms. If you want things to be automated, you've got to essentially use Power Automate in order for that form to be automated on the back end. So
that's running behind the scenes of these programs. That's how you're administering some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that is great. And so I'm assuming it's in Microsoft. So is it free within the Microsoft suite then?
It is.
Got Teams and everything?
Yeah. And so that was our key, was to say, hey, we have this tool, there's no vetting. If we can make it work, then let's utilize this, and then we can, continue to build on it. And, there's still challenges, and we still see limitations and things like that, but I am very resilient when it comes to that. I probably lose a couple hours of sleep at night of things I'm trying to think of. Then I'm like, there has to be a way. There has to be a way. But, it's, knock on wood, it's been great.
That is great. What a cool feature too, of Microsoft is always releasing new things within the ecosystem, and smart to stay in the bubble here. I know I have this. I don't have to get approval for a new software. How can we use what we have to solve the problems that are in front of us today? And that's also a really unique challenge, I feel like if a manager and employee aren't working the same shift, you would or in the same place during that shift, you'd almost have to delay training a ton if you required them to be working the same shift at the same time. That seems like a massive challenge that you'd have to overcome, so that this didn't turn into like a 10-month training program to get somebody up and running.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really helped just leverage that flow of communication, because if you've been in a TopGolf venue, they're huge. There's 3 to 4 floors on some. And so, you could you could spend a whole shift and maybe not see someone just because they're on a different level. And so, having that piece really helps drive the conversations, and to just the documentation component and saying, hey, let's pull up, if we need to look at, what things that you need to focus on. We've really leveraged those feedback forms for our one-on-ones, and making sure that, for success long-term, that you have everything that you need.
That is great. That is great. I'm curious, because I didn't ask you in the beginning, what does the team look like? You've mentioned you're building a lot. You're now a Power Automate expert. What does the support team look like? What did it take resources wise to build what you all built?
Yeah, so our team, we're small but mighty. Actually, we're not pretty small now that I think about it. We're a big team. We've got, regional training managers that really help. We have the instructional design piece. We've got me. We have our ops readiness team that really, once I say, okay, I'm ready, they help me structure what that's going to look like for rollout, setting up calls, really navigating all the logistics pieces of it. And then from there, once we launch, partnering with our regional training managers to say, okay, now, it's live, but they're supporting the field. How do I leverage, and how do we help each other make sure that compliance and people are getting the program complete and things like that? So partnering with them, and then just, our LMS team, and making sure that all of those components work properly. And if something goes wrong, being able to reach out to them and say, hey, we need to look at this, because lots of these things, especially in the beginning with pilot, is I envisioned it to work one way, but then we noticed that, they're in a venue and bandwidth is not strong enough, or things like that. Like, how do we make sure that this is working seamlessly? Or even with QR codes, they work, but if you have a firewall or something may go wrong. And so having them in that support system has been tremendous help. And, I think too, even in my past life, I didn't have that huge system. So it was really just me, right? Like just doing it all. So when I came to TopGolf, I was like, wow, like I have all these people, but it also helped me understand what I was trying to ask and relay for us to partner well.
That's great. I mean, it's a tale of two sides. I think a lot of folks are independent. They do it on their own. They're a one-person show trying to do it all. And there's a benefit to that because you've got to do everything. But I feel like in this environment too, you've got a support system. You also have experts. So you're probably learning a ton with each rollout of your ops readiness folks, your LMS folks are teaching you really deep nuances of things, just a different flavor. You're still doing it all, but in a very different way, just doing it through and with others.
Yeah.
That's great. This has been a great conversation. It's been fun to hear about it. There are a lot of people trying to build manager training programs, trying to meet the needs of the leaders across their hospitality companies. So I'm curious what advice you would have for somebody who's maybe at the beginning. They're at that early stage. Now that you've done it 4 times in 6 months, what advice would you have for somebody who's just starting on their management training journey?
Sure. I think first and foremost is, and now anyone that knows me will probably testify to this, but is have a tracking tool, and I want to say become organized because everyone has their own way of organization. But I think having some type of tracking tool to keep up with the moving parts, because if you're working on one course, you're going to have the pieces and who you're talking to because it's probably more of a smaller group. But when you've got multiple courses, multiple leadership, subject matter experts, multiple people involved and hands in the pot, it's a lot to keep up with. And so, you want to have that trust with them and know, hey, I'm running this huge program and, I'm going to hold you accountable for sending, but also to, I'm going to be accountable by following up as well. And so keeping all of those along your tracker, just, even if it's as simple as topic, red, yellow, green, to know where you are with that topic is tremendous help because eventually I promise you, when you end this program and you roll it out, you're going to have multiple red, yellow, greens. You're going to have a beige, you're going to have a teal because of all these moving parts that go with it. And then 2, I think 3, ultimately, that was 1. 2 is, stay patient when it comes to that because nothing is permanent. If you're rolling this out, whether it be QR codes or you are going to print a binder, it's a print. You can read, you can change things. Nothing's going to last forever. You can always make iterations. That was so key with the pilot. And what I've learned, because when I first started, I was like, do we need a pilot? But now I would never roll something out without a pilot because you're going to have all of those learnings and you can make, I think we went through about 3 iterations of the actual program. When I look at day 1 versus where we are now, I was like, whoa, that wasn't even what we came up with. So it's crazy. There's this, if you're familiar with Disney Plus, the Imagineers, for Disney, that I watched that documentary a couple years ago, I think during COVID, and it really changed my mindset when it came to feedback and giving feedback, receiving feedback, is because how they create, they have this idea of this project and how it starts at one place, but then ends here. And so every time when I would go through these meetings, I just kept that documentary in mind. And I was like, we're not Disney, but we are creating these experiences, and this experience is going to affect and create new ones for our playmakers. And so having this feedback is only going to help them create it. So giving feedback was my 3rd one, or giving and receiving feedback. Take it with a grain of salt, making sure that you're open to it because it's going to help those playmakers along the way. And it's all a collaboration. At the end of the day, you're going to have the final say as far as this is your product and you want to be proud of it. But everything that I've said before, really taking those feedback sessions and incorporating their feedback and making them feel like they're part of the program will really help drive the end product.
It's so good. And it's so interesting. You talk about the Imagineers. I call it a Pixar. And it's a step in my process for all of our teams when we create training and build to show your work along the way and to get feedback publicly. And we took it from, I think before Imagineers came out, I was watching a documentary on how they built Finding Nemo, and they wrote an article about it. And I was so inspired by the exact same thing, that like they're trying to create something amazing. The only way to do that is to share, get feedback, get knowledge in the creation process. And I feel like in learning, that's exactly what you're doing. You're creating content to create experiences that people will love. That's so cool that you do the same thing, and Imagineering brought it to life for you. That's amazing.